Section 1. What you are seeing is the outside of what is called the Dondale Youth Detention Centre, one of 2 facilities in the Northern Territory where children as young as 12 years old are imprisoned after being arrested by police or being sentenced by a court. Dondale achieved national and international attention in 2016 after investigative journalists from the ABC's Four Corners program broadcast harrowing footage from across the NT's juvenile justice system showing children being spit-hooded and tear-gassed. A federal inquiry called a Royal Commission was established to investigate the situation. In 2017, it released damning findings about the systemic abuse of incarcerated children in NT youth detention facilities. The inquiry found that the NT government had implemented, quote, a detention system seemingly intent on breaking rather than rehabilitating the children and young people in their care, in many cases causing lasting psychological damage to those whom the state had committed to help, end quote. Children were forced to do degrading acts by the guards, such as eat bird feces or cockroaches, or engage in fights with other detained children in exchange for chocolate or Coca-Cola. The inquiry also found that the guards deliberately withheld access to basic human needs such as water, food, and the use of toilets. Girls were inappropriately physically handled, restrained and stripped of their clothing by male youth justice officers, and were also subject to inappropriate sexualized attention, including touching, flirting, and sexualized comments. Bear in mind that almost 100% of incarcerated children in the Northern Territory at any given time are Indigenous. The federal inquiry said that Dondale was no place for children. It said it should be closed because of its severe, prison-like and unhygienic conditions. Dondale is not a purpose-built juvenile facility. It is a former adult jail. Children are kept in concrete cells and are surrounded with menacing reams of barbed wire. Section 2. Our topic today is the concept of rights, which is mostly associated with the tradition of moral theorizing known as deontology. That tradition emphasizes duties, obligations, and responsibilities. We encounter the language of rights all the time. You would be familiar with the most translated document in the world, the 1948 United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 5 of that declaration sets out the following human right: no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. But what is a human right? How does it relate to a legal right? And where does ethical decision-making fit into debates about rights? From a historical perspective, a predecessor of the modern conception of human rights was the concept of natural rights, which was developed in the medieval natural law tradition. But the modern idea of universal and inalienable human rights became culturally entrenched in the 18th century, following influential philosophical treatises, political revolutions, and new bills of rights. Among other philosophers associated with the so-called Enlightenment, Immanuel Kant was one of the promoters of the idea that humans were owed universal respect by virtue of their distinctive human nature. Kant argued that the task of a moral philosophy is to examine human nature to discover and formulate a single universal principle that can tell us which intentions and actions are morally right or morally wrong. Kant argued that the inherent rationality of human beings made certain actions morally good in themselves, as opposed to being morally good because of leading to some outcome, as a consequentialist like John Stuart Mill would hold. Kant formulated what he called the categorical imperative, which is an objective and necessary principle of reason applying in all situations to all rational beings, regardless of culture and personality. The morally correct thing to do for Kant is to act in line with this categorical imperative. Under one formulation, the categorical imperative looks like this: act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it become a universal law of nature. To see how this works, consider the well-worn example of lying. Suppose I want to lie to obtain an advantage. This is my maxim to be tested. Now, if lying to obtain an advantage were elevated to the status of a universal law, then everybody would be lying all the time. But in those circumstances, nobody would believe my lie. I would fail to obtain the sought advantage. Moreover, the impossibility of trusting one another in this situation would cause an end to all cooperative projects and eventually lead to a collapse of this society of liars. Thus, Kant reasons, lying to obtain an advantage cannot be a universal law, and I ought not act in line with it. Section 3. We could describe the categorical imperative as a rule specifying a moral right attached to human nature. This idea of a moral right is applicable because it is through moral reasoning and rational examination that the conclusion is reached about the rights that humans have. This status of a moral right as a rational ideal is what distinguishes it from a legal right, which is merely a privilege or duty imposed by the courts or by Parliament. A legal right is the byproduct of what is called positive law, the diverse legislations formulated by the culturally diverse legal systems used by humans. To understand this, let us apply the categorical imperative decision procedure to the situation here at Don Dale. Suppose that we collectively adopt the maxim, I will detain in horrible conditions those who do wrong to me. Kant requires us to universalize this maxim into a general law to see if it generates a contradiction when we go to act in line with it. Doing so produces a situation where everybody is detaining those who do wrong to them all the time. The difficulty here is that when I go to detain someone in horrible conditions because they have done wrong to me, they can arguably, on the basis of their horrible conditions in which I have detained them, detain me for doing wrong to them. Thus, this scenario would seem to generate a vicious circle of incarceration and structural social violence, where ultimately nobody retains their liberty. Given the absurdity of this conclusion, it would seem that the maxim, I will detain in horrible conditions those who do wrong to me, is immoral in the Kantian sense. We could formulate this insight as the moral right not to be detained in horrible conditions. Note that moral rights are, in an important sense, more fundamental than legal rights. Moral rights are always there as long as they are supported by reason. By contrast, legal rights can be introduced or extinguished at the will of the Parliament or the courts as a result of contingent and unethical factors. Thus, moral rights transcend legal rights and could even be understood as the standard against which any proposed legal rights should be measured. Section 4. We are filming this in 2023, 6 years after the federal inquiry recommended that Don Dale be closed. Indigenous children are still being imprisoned in these buildings. Various news reports and internal inquiries over the past couple of years have revealed that the conditions inside the facility are still horrible, with children sometimes being confined to their cells for over 20 hours a day due to the practice of rolling lockdowns. Most of these children are on remand, which means they have simply been arrested by the police and locked up while they wait for their legal case to be finalized, despite being technically innocent until proven guilty. The situation in Dondale raises critical questions. Are the human rights of incarcerated children being respected? Moreover, are their moral rights being respected? According to many commentators, the detention of children in Dondale in the conditions described breaches Article 5 of the Declaration of Human Rights because it constitutes cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. The conditions in Dondale also breaches several other international human rights agreements, such as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So the recognized human rights of these children are being violated. The moral rights of these children are also being violated, for the same reasons that we considered above with our maxim, I will detain in horrible conditions those who do wrong to me. Under a Kantian view, it is possible to arrive at a moral right prohibiting the incarceration of children in such conditions. Section 5. So why, if the situation is wrong from the perspective of Kantian moral rights, and wrong from the perspective of recognized human rights, does it continue? This is where the distinction between the kinds of rights becomes really important. Ultimately, the only rights that practically matter are legal rights, because it is the legal apparatus within which decisions are made, including decisions about crime and punishment. In Australia and other legal systems, legal rights will be enforceable even if they are flagrant violations of human rights and moral rights. This is one of the great problems in moral philosophy and political action. Morality and the criminal law are not identical with each other, despite what some commentators like to believe. Holding that the legal rights encoded in laws made by the courts and parliament are identical with moral rights is one of the illusions that needs to be overcome to properly diagnose the root causes of entrenched injustice. In the Northern Territory, there is a significant level of entrenched injustice, with staggering increases in the rates of incarceration for Indigenous men, women and children. In 2017, a historic gathering of Indigenous leaders from across the country published the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which addressed this crisis of incarceration, focusing specifically on the impacts on Indigenous youth. They said, "Proportionately, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them. And our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future."